Most people don't think about what happens after death, but for one woman, it became her entire life. Her name is Nabaweya, a quiet, middle-aged woman from a remote Egyptian village. No husband, no children. Her job, washing the dead before they're buried. A sacred task, a lonely one. For years, she worked in silence. She knew every ritual by heart, from the folding of the linen to the final drop of rose water. She never questioned her role, never feared the dead. Until one night, something changed. It started with a sound, not a voice, not a whisper. A knock, soft at first, then louder. She was alone in the mortuary, preparing to wash the body of an elderly woman. The room was freezing, silent, until that knock came again. This time from the inside of the washing room. She froze. Goosebumps spread across her arms. She turned slowly, but saw nothing. The body was still. The air was still. Maybe it was just her imagination. That's what she told herself. But it didn't stop there. A few nights later, she was washing another body when her tea, which she'd placed on a nearby stool, spilled for no reason. As she turned to grab a towel, the corpse's hand shifted, only slightly, but enough to send her heart pounding. The fingers bent just a little, as if they were curling into a fist. Still, she tried to brush it off. The body was stiff. Maybe it was the nerves tightening. Maybe the tea had tipped on its own. She was tired, overworked. But then, a week later, while preparing a young girl's body, something happened she could never explain and would never forget. The accident was all over the village. 5 young people, 2 girls and 3 boys, were driving back from a nearby town when their car swerved off an old, crumbling bridge. The kind of bridge the villagers had been complaining about for years. Narrow, mud-covered, dangerous in the rain. The car flipped and sank into the canal. By the time anyone got there, it was too late. All 5 were gone. Nabaweya was called in to prepare the bodies. She had done this before. Drownings, accidents, even worse. But this time, something felt off. It was late when she and her colleague, Safeya, began the ritual washing. They laid the 2 girls on the metal tables, side by side. The room was silent, except for the sound of water running and the soft movements of cloth on skin. The first body was cold, pale, still. But the second girl, she was different. As Nabaweya turned her over to wash her back, she noticed something strange. A faint smile on the girl's face. Not the slack expression of death. This was something else. Her lips were curved, just slightly, and her eyelids fluttered. Nabaweya blinked, froze, looked again. The girl's eyes were closed, like they had been all along. Safeya hadn't noticed. She kept working. Trying to stay calm, Nabaweya continued. She dipped a cloth into warm water, wiped the girl's forehead, and that's when it happened. A whisper, right next to her ear. Not loud, just one word, a name, one she couldn't make out. She looked around the room. No one was there. No one could have spoken. But she heard it, as clearly as she heard her own breath. She stepped back, heart pounding. The smile on the girl's face was gone. Nabaweya didn't say a word, neither did Safeya. But they both knew something was wrong. Because this wasn't the last time one of the dead would try to speak. Her name was Sadia, 18 years old, a soft-spoken girl from the village. She had drowned under strange circumstances. Slipped, they said. Lost her balance on that same cursed bridge. But Nabaweya had her doubts. The girl's body arrived at the mortuary just before dawn. Wrapped in a white cloth, delicate and small, almost too light. It was the coldest day of the month, and yet, when Nabaweya touched her, the body was warm. That shouldn't have been possible. She whispered a prayer and began the ritual. Everything started normally. She washed the girl's arms, her legs, her face, but when she touched her neck, she felt it, the faintest pulse, barely there, like an echo, like a memory of life. She froze. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe her hands were trembling. She reached for the cotton to wipe around the girl's eyes, and one eyelid twitched, not in the way a muscle might spasm after death. This was controlled, intentional. The air in the room changed. It grew heavy, charged. Then, without warning, the girl gasped. A low, wet sound, like someone choking on their last breath. Nabaweya dropped the cloth. The basin clattered to the floor. Water splashed across her shoes. She staggered back, eyes locked on the girl's mouth. It didn't move again. The light in the room flickered. Once, twice, then cut out entirely. Pitch black. And in that darkness, Nabaweya heard it. The same whisper. Louder this time. 2 words. Help. Me. Her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. She reached for the switch. Nothing. The room stayed dark. She wasn't alone anymore. She never had been. When the lights finally returned, the girl lay still, eyes shut, expression blank. But Nabaweya knew what she heard. She knew what she felt. And she knew something was coming. Something that wouldn't stop just because the body had been buried. Nabaweya tried to forget. She buried herself in routine, cleaned the tools, folded the linens, said her prayers twice instead of once, but none of it helped. Something had changed. The silence around her felt heavier, the air colder. Even the dead seemed less still. She stopped drinking tea at the washing table. She stopped looking the bodies in the eyes. And yet, one night, as she reached to close a corpse's mouth, she could swear it smiled at her. By the time she finished the last body, her hands were trembling. She needed to go home, to forget. But home was no escape. That night, as she stepped into her apartment, the lights flickered, just like they had in the mortuary. Her front door creaked behind her, even though there was no wind, and the mirror in her hallway fogged up, as if someone had breathed on it. She lived alone. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe she was tired. Maybe it was her mind playing tricks. She turned on the stove, boiled some water, sat down to rest. But then she heard it again. That whisper. It wasn't behind her this time. It was inside the room. She turned sharply. Her heart stopped. There, standing near the kitchen table, was Sadia, still dressed in white, wet, barefoot. Her long black hair clung to her cheeks like seaweed. Her eyes, wide, black, and alive. Nabaweya blinked. The girl didn't move. She tried to speak, to ask how, to say anything, but the moment her lips parted, the girl vanished. Just like that. No sound, no scream, no trace. Only the wet footprints left behind, leading back toward the front door. Nabaweya didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Not even when the call to prayer echoed at dawn. She wasn't just seeing things. Something had followed her home, and it was just getting started. The next morning, Nabaweya returned to work, but her hands refused to touch another body. She wasn't just haunted, she was being warned. So she did the unthinkable. She spoke out. At the funeral for Sadia, she pulled aside one of the older women and asked, "Are you sure it was an accident?" The woman's face changed. Her lips tightened. Her eyes darted around the room. "Be quiet," she whispered. You don't know what you're saying. But Nabaweya knew exactly what she was saying. The whispers around the village had already started. Some said Sadia had been cursed. Others said she had learned something she wasn't supposed to. Something about the mayor, or the doctor, or that strange man who visited the village once a year, always carrying black incense and a rolled-up mat. There were rumors of rituals, of sacrifices, of a deal made years ago that brought wealth to some and death to others. Sadia had been asking too many questions about that bridge, about why the village never fixed it, about the accidents that kept happening there. And then, just like that, she slipped, or so they said. Nabaweya couldn't stop thinking about that smile, that whisper, that moment when Sadia's eyes opened for just a second. She wasn't ready to die. She didn't fall. She was pushed. And if that was true, then the people who buried her alive were still walking free. Nabaweya needed proof. She couldn't rely on whispers or shadows. She needed something real, something she could hold. So she went where no one else dared, the hospital archives. Late at night, while most of the staff slept, she slipped down the back hallway of the old clinic. The light bulbs flickered just like they had in the mortuary. The walls smelled like mildew and old medicine. At the end of the corridor sat a single room, locked, silent, and always ignored. The record room. She knocked once. No answer. Then the door creaked open. Inside, the security guard was half asleep. She offered him tea, the good kind. He grumbled and waved her through. He didn't ask why she was there. She didn't explain. She went straight to the drawer marked Sadia. And there it was. The official report claimed Sadia drowned due to slippery mud and poor visibility. The file mentioned rain, mist, unsafe conditions. But Nabaweya remembered that day clearly. It didn't rain. The sky had been cold, but clear. And that bridge hadn't been repaired in over a decade. She kept flipping through the pages. And then she saw it. A second version of the report. Handwritten. Hidden. This one told a different story. It described bruises on Sadia's arms, a scratch across her neck, signs of struggle. It said she might have been unconscious before she hit the water. And the person who signed it? Dr. Atef, the head physician, a man known for his connections to the village mayor. The same mayor whose daughter once mysteriously disappeared and was never spoken of again. Something wasn't right. And the more she read, the clearer it became. Sadia didn't die in an accident. She was silenced because she discovered something she wasn't supposed to. And now, Nabaweya knew too much. The next morning, Nabaweya returned to the hospital, not as a washer of the dead, but as a woman ready to expose the truth. She walked straight into Dr. Atef's office. He was calm, too calm, as if he had been expecting her. Before she could say a word, he slid a piece of paper across the desk. A check. Signed. Stamped. More money than she'd ever seen. For your silence, he said. And your retirement. Her throat dried. She didn't touch the check. You know she didn't drown, she said. He smiled. She was a good girl, he said quietly. Too curious, too loud. He stood up, walked to the window, and spoke without looking back. She found out about the reports. The money. The rituals. She started asking questions about the mayor. About me. About what really happened to all those other kids. Nabaweya's hands trembled. You killed her, she whispered. He turned, but his expression didn't change. She wasn't supposed to end up there, he said. We just needed her gone." Then his voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes the living become more dangerous than the dead." And in that moment, she realized he didn't care. Not about Saadia, not about the truth, not even about his own soul. He was part of it, all of it. The bribery, the forged autopsies, the forgotten bodies. But Nabaweya wasn't going to stay silent. She stood, pocketed the second autopsy report, and left without another word. By nightfall, she had spoken to the authorities in a neighboring district. She handed them everything: the files, the reports, the names. Within days, arrests began. The mayor, the doctor, even a few hospital staff members who had looked the other way. The scandal rocked the village. But for Nabaweya, the victory felt hollow. Because while the corrupt had been caught, something else was still out there. The village changed. The arrests made headlines. Politicians gave speeches. Construction finally began on a new bridge. People said justice had been served. But Nabaweya knew better. Because even after the truth came out, the visits didn't stop. Late at night, she would hear footsteps in her hallway. Barefoot, slow, wet. Her windows would fog up from the inside. The mirrors would show a second reflection standing behind her. She burned incense, read verses aloud. She even slept with the lights on. But nothing helped. One evening, she returned home to find her kitchen faucet running. On the wall, written in fog on the glass, were 2 words: "Thank you." That night, she dreamed of Saadia again, standing at the foot of her bed, her hair dry, her smile soft, her eyes peaceful. It was the first time Nabaweya had seen her like that. But it wasn't the last. Sometimes she appeared in dreams. Sometimes just as a feeling. A warm breath in a cold room. A whisper that didn't scare her anymore. But other nights, there were others. Not Saadia. Other voices. Other faces. Other deaths that hadn't been solved. Yet, it was as if by opening the door for one soul, she had opened it for many. Nabaweya doesn't speak much these days. She still works, still washes. But sometimes when the lights flicker in the mortuary, she pauses, listens. Because she knows some of the dead never rest. Not until someone listens. Not until the truth is washed clean.